Okay, so Robyn, Monsanto is a dirty word in some people's book. Could you help us understand what's going on there?
Monsanto is a chemical company. It's been in existence for over 100 years. Their primary purpose was to sell chemicals. And that was fine. You know, they sold chemicals like DDT. They helped with the ingredients in Agent Orange. And for most people, especially for parents and grandparents, the association with that name is with a chemical company. But it was in the 1990s when they decided to get into food. And as someone who covered the food industry as an equity analyst, never once did we meet with Monsanto. We met with the food companies. What Monsanto was inventing at the time was this genetically engineered ingredient, these genetically engineered products that literally were made to withstand their chemicals. So as a company that is in the business of selling chemicals, it was a brilliant business model because they were literally hardwiring food crops so that they could withstand increasing doses of chemicals. And in the first 13 years of the introduction of these products by Monsanto, there was a 527 million pound increase in the rate of chemical applications to our food crops. And I think that's probably what a lot of people have a problem with, is that a fundamental shift happened in the way that we produce food. It was introduced by a chemical company. It definitely helped them sell more chemicals, but it was introduced without ever informing the American public that it had happened, despite the fact that 60% of the world's population was told that this fundamental shift had happened, that these genetically engineered ingredients and all these chemicals that were being applied to them were suddenly going into the food supply.
What are the environmental impacts of GMOs?
Well, you know, I mean, when I first heard about a GMO, I didn't know what it was. And, you know, there are a lot of terms used in the food industry. Again, I'd been an analyst that had covered the food industry. This business model had never been presented to us at any conference or anywhere else. So, you know, I was one of the first that was saying, what is a GMO? You know, we have all these different terms that are used in the food industry, and it means genetically modified organism. And in the beginning, there were two kinds. One was a genetically engineered soybean, which was literally engineered to withstand increasing doses of a chemical called Roundup. And so these soybeans were called Roundup Ready soybeans. Well, this chemical Roundup is the same chemical, it's a weed killer, that parents and moms are told not to store under their kitchen sinks because of the risk to children. That's the same chemical that was being applied in record amounts onto our food crops. The second kind that was introduced was a genetically engineered corn. And that corn was literally engineered so that it could produce its own insecticide. There was a growing concern of the spraying of insecticides, so using this new technology, Monsanto was able to genetically engineer the corn so that it could produce its own insecticide. And as they were trying to get that through the FDA, using a lot of industry-funded science, which is a tactic the tobacco industry has also used, they were able to claim that it was substantially equivalent to any corn that had existed before, that it looked, tasted, and smelled the same. However, at the same time they were claiming that it was substantially equivalent, the EPA was saying it's substantially different enough that this has to be regulated by the EPA as a pesticide. And then on top of that, the US Patent and Trademark Office was saying this is also substantially different enough that it merits its own patent. And that patent is designed to protect the unique characteristics and traits of that product, obviously to protect the profitability of the company that's inventing it. So those were the first two genetically engineered ingredients, or GMOs, that were introduced onto the market.
So what is it specifically about GMOs that threatens our health?
The concern around the world, which led over 60% of the world's population to label these ingredients and over 20 countries to just restrict them and not allow them at all, was that we didn't know what the long-term impact of the introduction of these ingredients into the food supply were going to be, not only on the health of, say, a child with autism or a pregnant mom or maybe somebody with cancer, but there was also concern, especially in countries like France and New Zealand, over what does this actually do to the soil and the health of the soil when you are genetically engineering these crops to withstand record doses of this chemical application. And it was, you know, both a human health and environmental health concern that led a lot of countries, most of our trading partners, to take this precautionary approach and to label these ingredients at the very least, or in some cases restrict them altogether.
It's very scary, and especially I know you've got a personal story in terms of the relationship to allergies and kids, and we're seeing it a lot more now. A lot of people think it's because of GMOs. What do you think?
You know, I mean, children are vulnerable to a whole host of things, and when you're looking at a condition like food allergies or autism or pediatric cancer, it's very hard to control for one component, for one element. The concern with children, however, is that they have an immature immune system and it's developing as they age. So a baby has a very immature immune system, and your digestive tract actually holds 70% of your immune system. So whatever you're putting into a baby's mouth that's going into their digestive system is really having a direct impact on that child's immunity. And at a very young age, there's a fragility there that, you know, it lessens as somebody matures, as a child matures or becomes an adult. And so there's a vulnerability with a child's immune system in those early ages. And I think, you know, right now we're starting to see a lot of science is coming out around pesticides and their impact on the developing immune system of a child. You have, you know, the President's Cancer Panel, for example, which was a bipartisan panel, originally put together under the Bush administration, and it released its report under the Obama administration in 2010. And in that report, it actually has a special section that's calling out the need to exercise higher levels of precaution when it comes to children's exposures to things like pesticides and all of these chemicals that are being applied to these genetically engineered crops. And it's because of that vulnerability. And, you know, I think why it is particularly vulnerable as a country to not address this is that, you know, they only represent less than 30% of the population, but they're 100% of our future. And right now, this generation of children has the title of Generation RX, and it's because 1 in 3 American children has autism, allergies, ADHD, or asthma. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, is now saying that cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in kids under the age of 15. The CDC is also saying that the rates of autism have increased 30% in the last 2 years. And genetics don't change this quickly, but the environmental factors have.
Okay, so how do we, concerned citizens, figure out how not to support GMOs, and what can we do beyond, you know, our purchase power in the grocery store?
You know, I think that's where it gets really exciting, because you can spend a lot of time looking back and pointing fingers and trying to figure out why we got here. But the fact of the matter is that the President Cancer Panel says that 41% of us are expected to get cancer in our lifetime. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women. We know that's true because we all have a friend or a family member that has battled that disease. And at this point, you know, there's not a mom in the country that isn't walking into a preschool that isn't seeing firsthand autism or food allergies or diabetes in these kids. We know that's where we are. And I think a lot of time and energy has been focused on political efforts, but I think the companies probably need the political cover more than anything. So as consumers, to really share your voice with the companies, whether it's a retailer like Kroger or Target or Safeway, let them know that this is where you stand today and you really are looking for free-from food, that this is not a fad. There's a lot of spin out there in the marketplace saying that these trends are fads. Cancer's not a fad. Autism is not a fad. And this demand for clean food that's free from artificial ingredients is not a fad. So the more that we can communicate that with the companies, then they can go back to their shareholders and to their boards with more and more, you know, information on their side saying this is where the 21st century consumer stands today. And I think, you know, today more than ever before, with social media and our connectivity online, we're able to share information, we're able to get it out. And, you know, in the initial stages of this, a lot of the companies have sort of come under the hammer for that. There's been a lot of PR messes they've had to clean up. And I think, you know, right now, rather than wait for the other shoe to fall, I would simply, you know, say to these companies, just move with us. You know, we've had a relationship with you guys for 35, 40 years. We don't really want to break up with you. We want you to grow up with us. And that just means dumping the artificial ingredients and dumping the junk and giving us food that's free from GMOs, additives, dyes, artificial growth hormones, so that we can start to serve our families the same clean products that moms and families are getting overseas. And I think, ultimately, they know they can do it. These companies know that they can do it because they already formulate their products differently overseas. So in these countries that haven't allowed GMOs or artificial growth hormones or no longer allow artificial dyes, our American companies have formulated their products differently overseas. So we're not asking them to reinvent the wheel. We're just saying, you know what, we finally here, we're awake, and we want you to move with us. And for them to recognize that it doesn't have to be scary for them anymore, that it is an enormous economic opportunity. And when you look at how fast this sector is growing, it's expected to grow 14% between 2013 and 2018, and yet only 1% of U.S. farmland is under organic management. That means that that entire economic opportunity is being captured by countries like China and Romania. We're outsourcing that whole opportunity to these countries that are capturing this organic demand. And I look at that and I think, that's crazy. That should be captured for the American economy. That should be captured for the American farmers, for the American families, for the American companies. So let's really, kind of get our heads around this and start to build out that supply chain here internally in the United States so that we can create a food system that meets the needs of 21st century families. And again, I think the power of the consumer in the marketplace is huge today. We have enormous power. Never underestimate your ability to connect with a company, to really write those letters, to communicate with store managers, and use social media to share information and to really get the word out, because these companies are listening and they are watching. Like Kellogg, for example, their share price get clobbered because they're trying to deny the consumer what she wants. And Kellogg, just announced they're going to be laying off 7% of their workforce. Or a company like Kroger, Chipotle, or White Wave, which is saying, you know what, we get it. Not everybody has the same carton of cow's milk in their fridge anymore. We're going to be there to meet your demand today, 21st century mom, parent, family. We're not debating the science, we're just going to give you what you need. And those are the companies that are being rewarded. So, there's a lot of great leadership out there already. And I think that's what makes this a really exciting time. So don't spend any time looking back, focusing on the past or why we got here, or blaming. Just focus on the future and this landscape in front of us that is wide open, and how we get to create that opportunity and to create this new food economy.
Absolutely. I have chill bumps right now because you're empowering us to have that dialogue, and I know that is what creates change. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I look forward to seeing you in person next time.